Captainmidnight.
This video is brought to you by CuriosityStream. Get 2 great streaming services for less than $15 for the entire year using my link in the description. You know, I've made a decent number of career retrospectives in the past couple years, but when a friend of mine suggested Shia LaBeouf, I couldn't believe it had never occurred to me. LaBeouf's career is incredibly interesting because it has changed and really continues to change super dramatically. From the Disney Channel to the leading role of a blockbuster franchise to a controversial, very sexually explicit Lars von Trier movie, this is an actor who has covered an incredible amount of ground, with a lot of his best and most thought-provoking work just being released in the past few years. But what's so unique about covering LaBeouf is he's the first actor I've talked about who wrote a raw and emotional feature film about his life as a child actor, and how he's carried so much of his trauma and baggage into adulthood. Which makes it really hard to talk about Shia the actor without digging into Shia the human being, at least a little bit. So while this video will be mainly focused on his film work, I don't think I would be doing you, the viewers, justice by not talking about some of the dramatic things that have happened off of the movie sets as well. So with all that being said, let's get into the career of Shia LaBeouf, the child star, the internet meme, and the actor.
Just do it! Yes, you can!
Shia LaBeouf started out not as an actor, but as a stand-up comic. At the age of 10, he was doing stand-up weekly at comedy clubs in California, and apparently, his act was pretty far from the tame material of the Disney Channel. His shtick was telling the dirtiest jokes he could, trying and often succeeding to get the adults to laugh in shock at the language coming out of the mouth of a 10-year-old. It made him and his separated parents a little bit of money, but that was it. It wasn't until a friend of his booked a small part on TV's Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman that he began thinking about acting. He learned that to become an actor, you needed an agent. So, still just 10 years old, he grabbed a phone book, looked up an agent, and called them pretending to be a middle-aged English manager, telling the woman who answered about what a great talent his client, Shia LaBeouf, was. The agent wasn't fooled, but she was pretty impressed with the bold move, and thought he was genuinely funny on the phone, so she agreed to go see one of the young comedian's shows. A few weeks later, he was booking roles on The X-Files, ER, and Suddenly Susan. Very soon afterwards, he landed a starring role in Spivvy's Kid Brother, retitled at the very last minute, thankfully, to Even Stevens. I'm guessing a lot of you are pretty familiar with the show, so I won't go into a long synopsis here, but I will say that LaBeouf played Louis Stevens, a mischievous and goofy little brother, a role that was really well suited to the actor's limited skill set at the time. Going back to the pilot of the show, it's pretty clear that LaBeouf didn't quite have the whole acting part of acting down yet. He can be very stilted and wooden in the dialogue scenes. Now that's something that would change over time, but where he always excelled, and what Even Stevens allowed him to tap into, was goofy slapstick comedy. Eventually though, that skill set would grow. Even Stevens finished at 65 episodes, the syndication standard for Disney Channel shows. They did a made-for-TV movie, and soon the young actor was on to bigger things. Staying inside the Disney machine, he starred as Stanley Yelnats in Holes. Honestly, one of my favorite movies as a kid. I had the soundtrack, the book, everything. What makes Holes a cut above most live-action kids movies is just how cleverly constructed it is. It features a lot of very different stories in different time periods and weaves them together in a way that feels kind of like a magic trick. And LaBeouf is really solid in it too, a former Disney Channel star that's holding his own against greats like Sigourney Weaver and Tim Blake Nelson. As Stanley, he's kind of cast in the role of a put-upon everyman. Thrown into a juvenile prison camp over a misunderstanding, Stanley goes from a shy kid who can barely stick up for himself to a confident adventurer uncovering the secrets of his family history. It's not an incredible performance or anything, but it's a huge step up from the early days of Even Stevens. And then, well, you know what happened. After a few indie movies and supporting roles in things like Constantine and I, Robot, LaBeouf was cast as the lead in a huge franchise, Michael Bay's Transformers. 2007 was a hugely transformative year for the actor's career. He found himself at the center of not just Transformers, but Disturbia and the animated Surf's Up that year as well, with all three of them doing really well at the box office. Shia LaBeouf, the Disney Channel star, was gone, and Shia LaBeouf, the bankable movie star, had arrived. But I'm not sure that was totally a good thing. His work had caught the attention of Steven Spielberg, who recommended him for Transformers, which Spielberg produced. Which is great, if only a lot of his movies at the time were a little better. Disturbia is a fun teen thriller, a pretty clear ripoff of Rear Window, but it works well enough. Surf's Up was a really forgettable animated Penguin movie, which to be honest, I remembered almost nothing about except that it spawned a WWE-focused sequel. And Transformers is, well, Transformers. The first film is very watchable, and sees LaBeouf cast as yet another relatable everyman type character, Sam Witwicky. The problem is, this is a Michael Bay franchise, and watching these movies, it's hard to shake the feeling that Bay hates these characters, especially Sam Witwicky, who almost always comes across as a stupid, shallow moron, except for the 10 minutes near the end of these things where they need him to be a hero. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I really don't want this to be a Transformers-centric video, but I honestly see the franchise as a double-edged sword for LaBeouf. It made him a bigger star than ever, but in a pretty thankless and boring role. 2008 was another big year though. First there was Eagle Eye, a fun, over-the-top political thriller that did okay at the box office, but mostly seems forgotten today. The real notable film for him that year was, of course, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. On paper, it was another success for the actor. It came out, did well at the box office, got decent reviews, and set LaBeouf's character up for a sequel. But behind the scenes, LaBeouf was unhappy. He would go on to badmouth the film in interviews over and over again through the years, even going so far as to say that Harrison Ford didn't like the movie either. Ford didn't like these comments and responded by saying, "I think he was a f***ing idiot. As an actor, I think it's my obligation to support the film without making a complete ass of myself." It also apparently really severed his ties to Steven Spielberg. In an interview, LaBeouf didn't paint the director in the best light, saying, "He told me there's a time to be a human being and have an opinion, and there's a time to sell cars. It brought me freedom, but it also killed my spirits because this was a dude I looked up to like a sensei." When he pissed off Spielberg and added to that a few arrests that both seemed to stem from his drinking problems, it became pretty clear that the actor's time starring in major blockbusters was coming to an end. Well, okay, give or take a very forgettable sequel to Wall Street.
The Transformers War has invaded our world, and the Earth is no match for the evil Decepticons.
The next few years were some of the strangest and most interesting of the actor's career. After a part in 2011's Maniac, he made a short film that got him in some pretty hot water, as he was accused of ripping off the script nearly word for word from indie comic creator Daniel Klaus. But getting that kind of negative attention might have been the entire point, as LaBeouf used it to kick off some pretty weird performance art, wherein even his apology to Klaus was plagiarized, and his next announced project was also clearly plagiarized from the comic creator. The actor would eventually say that he was trying to make a point about copyright laws and how they hinder free expression. An idea that, as a YouTuber who has to deal with copyright claims constantly, I'm pretty sympathetic to. But speaking for myself, I think he could have picked a much better target than an indie comic book creator. This did kick off the infamous "I'm not famous anymore" phase, which I remember finding just really strange and off-putting at the time, but I kind of view it differently now. He seemed to get really self-reflective about the narrative of his career, that he was this typical child star who was flaming out and getting in trouble, getting DUIs. But that's not all he was doing. Working with students from a university in London, he starred in a short film that was made for one purpose: to create memes. Absolutely no copyright was applied to the material, so people were free to remix and remake Shia clapping, yelling "just do it," and a ton of other stuff, however they wanted. And they definitely did. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if those memes had been viewed more times than his actual films, which, considering that was the whole point of making them, counts as a pretty big success. But he didn't leave film behind. After a part in Von Trier's controversial Nymphomaniac, he gave maybe the best performance in his career up to that point in 2014's Fury, a movie that I think is genuinely underrated. There's a new haunted quality to LaBeouf's performance that I think would become one of the actor's best tools going forward. At the time, people were really making fun of his commitment to this role, which I get, like he literally had a perfectly healthy tooth permanently removed for it, but it paid off here, even if the movie wasn't collecting Oscars or anything. In Fury, you see an actor that's so much less mannered and obvious than his performance in something like Transformers or Eagle Eye. He may have used that broad, over-the-top style to land his big break in Even Stevens, but I think it was completely shedding that and evolving beyond it that made him a truly great actor. American Honey shows that off perfectly. Clocking in at nearly 3 hours long, American Honey really locked into the aesthetics of what I like about so much of a lot of LaBeouf's recent work. It follows Star, a poor 18-year-old girl from the South who leaves her awful home life to go on the road with a bunch of other lost young people, led partially by LaBeouf's character. I loved this movie, and part of what I like about it is how it shows off parts of the American experience that are rarely shown on screen. The gas stations, motels, Kmart parking lots, and honky-tonk bars of this film feel real and lived in a way that matches something like Sean Baker's incredible Tangerine or The Florida Project. And LaBeouf's performance fits that world perfectly. Maybe it's a little hacky to compare an actor to a young Robert De Niro, but I guess I'm going to anyway. In many ways, they're nothing alike, but I think something that they both have, and that LaBeouf starts using really well in Fury, is the ability to convey a lot of pain, anger, and volatility without barely saying a word, something he's continued putting to great use in the years since. It's something that I don't even get a hint of in his early performances like Disturbia, which brings us to Honeyboy and Peanut Butter Falcon. Both movies I like a lot, and both movies that feel completely un-Hollywood. See, they both kind of exist in that same sort of America Left Behind that American Honey did. Honeyboy is my favorite of the two, with director Alma Harrell working off of LaBeouf's script about his own life. And in case you haven't seen the movie, I'll tell you right now, Shia LaBeouf is terrifying playing his own father. The film cuts back and forth between two timelines. One set in the Even Stevens era, where the Shia stand-in is living with his abusive dad in a rundown motel, and the other where he's played by Lucas Hedges in court-ordered rehab at the height of his Transformers fame. At its center, it's about his relationship with his father, and how he, kind of through writing, tries to move past that abuse and maybe even forgive the incredibly troubled man who caused it. LaBeouf plays the father character in a way that paints him in an unapologetically awful light. Like every time he's on screen, you're just holding your breath, waiting for whatever awful thing he's gonna say to his son next. But he also plays him with a lot of humanity, acknowledging the way that his own dad's abusive father had affected him too. So, obviously, this isn't the most fun watch in the world. But I don't want to make it sound like it's a movie that's hard to get through either. The script is understated, often pretty funny and smart, and it leaves a lot up to the audience's interpretation. It really does feel like someone working out their issues on the page, but in a very skillful way. Honestly, if this movie is anything to go off of, I think LaBeouf should continue screenwriting just as much as acting, because I was kind of blown away by how good of a job he did here. Shia LaBeouf's career is filled with ups and downs, and a lot of mistakes, as he will often acknowledge. But I think part of the reason he struck a chord with so many people is because he feels authentically strange. He started out in the hyper-controlled world of the Disney Channel and has evolved into an actor that feels really independent. He turned his back on the biggest director in the world to pursue his own passions, even if those projects sometimes turned out to be wrong-headed or a little embarrassing. Even if I don't think all of his indie films are great, like, honestly I'm not a big fan of Nymphomaniac, enough are that I'm very glad that he left the world of franchise filmmaking behind, and dug deeper into what makes him tick as an artist. Talking about the careers of interesting actors has easily been one of my favorite things I've done while running this channel. But another close contender is talking about some of my favorite TV title sequences. Right now, on my streaming service Nebula, I have videos on Cheers and Rick and Morty, where I take a deep dive into what made those shows' title sequences work so well. Other creators have talked about the title sequences for Batman, Westworld, Buffy, and a ton more. Not only that, but starting with this video, all videos I upload to Nebula will be ad-free. And I'm far from alone. Nebula features Lindsay Ellis, Just Right, Nando V Movies, and a ton of other creators. That's because stuff that might not work on YouTube can find a great home on Nebula. And if you sign up through CuriosityStream, you'll also get a great documentary streaming service at the same time, featuring docs on tech, history, science, and more. Right now, CuriosityStream is offering a 26% discount on the bundle, meaning you can get both for less than $15 a year. Not a month, a year. Get in on this great deal and go to curiositystream.com/CaptainMidnight. That's curiositystream.com/CaptainMidnight.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.